All right. Recording's going. It's 2:29.
Let them come.
Yeah, well, they said if you build it, they will come.
Yeah. The giving tree.
Yeah.
We're giving our knowledge. Let's have
If
them
you
come.
grow the forest, if you grow the forest and plant the trees,
Yeah.
something will happen.
I feel like this presentation has really allowed me to look further into Agnes Dennis more.
Hmm.
And what an amazing woman to plant all those trees. Like 11,000 in Finland, 100,000 in New York. I mean, just incredible.
Yeah, the more I looked into that Wheatfield project, I did
Oh,
that. I looked into that last year and a bunch of other public works. They were talking about how a lot of times she wouldn't even get public projects funded and finished because like people didn't understand them and they were like too ahead of her time. Like she had concepts for sculptures that like wouldn't be able to be made
mhm.
because like of technological limitations. But like
Yeah.
to be that forward thinking is like wild.
Totally. I feel like a lot of her exhibitions now that she's getting light for are just concepts, concept designs, but just to see them made, it's amazing. So,
Yeah. All right. Well, we don't have any participants, but it is 2:31.
mhm,
So, do you want to go ahead and get started?
absolutely.
Okay. Um, Alrighty. Let's see if
Are,
I can do it.
um, are we good to share? Okay.
Yes.
So, this is our presentation. It's entitled The Giving Tree, The Gift of Sticks and Figures. So my name is Zena Tredenik Kirby, and I'm a third year PhD candidate in art education. And today we are going to focus on different perspectives of cost, which is our section of sustainability. And I will be coming from an educational perspective and the awareness of sight. During our presentation, we will be engaging with inspirational resources and also highlighting artists to anthropologists.
Hello, my name is Alex Russell, and I am a second year graduate in the visual arts program, graduate student in the visual arts program, primarily in drawing and painting, but also working in sculpture and found materials. And today we were going to do the presentation a little bit differently and have room for open collaboration and contribution. And a section for having a longer discussion at the end, but we'll see what happens and if we have any other participants. Hi, Alex. Hi, other Alex.
Hi, I'm just coming to check in and make sure that you guys are both here and
Yeah.
found your way into the room. Okay.
Yes, we did.
We have participants that are just kind of popping in and out of rooms. For some reason, we have a pretty low number of attendees today, despite having high registration numbers. So I'm not sure. We have 6 rooms happening simultaneously, and some of them are in-person events. So I encourage you, I know it's being recorded, but if you, hopefully people will come in and come see your conversation. But if not, you can still have the recording and save that for later content if you need to use it at any point or as a teaching tool, which is also helpful.
Yeah, thanks.
I have to pop into other rooms, but I will come back in and see you guys at some point.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. And we did want to take a moment to do a land acknowledgement. It appears that the photo has not loaded. A minor tech issue, but we did want to acknowledge that we are on Indigenous land. I am calling in from State College, Pennsylvania, which is on unceded Susquehannock land.
Can you just click on it again? Maybe it just needs to have one more click.
Yeah.
Nope. Yes, so we have a glitch. And I am calling in today actually from central New Jersey, about 45 minutes outside of New York. And I am on the Lenape land.
Ooh. And so today we were going to frame our discussion in terms of the Giving Tree, which is a story that a lot of people know about. pretty synonymous with thinking about our relationship with nature. However, it is also a really controversial book, which we thought we would kind of discuss a little bit. So The Giving Tree is a bit complicated because not only is it a book that talks about, the bounty that nature can provide for us and our relationship with nature, but also it does talk about an exploitative relationship between this boy and this female gendered tree. And it's actually been banned from some libraries because of its kind of sexist undertones. However, I think if we look at it from a critical perspective, and that it shows how dangerous this one-way relationship with nature, like that only involves taking, if we find a critical way to look at that, it can help us kind of reframe the way that we think about our relationship with nature.
We want you to reflect on the Giving Tree, and we have a little prompt here of what narratives influence our relationship with nature. So throughout our presentation, if you just want to meditate and just think, is there influences, of our relationships with nature that what are those narratives? So in dissecting this quote from the Giving Tree, I am too big to climb and play, said the boy. I want to buy things and have fun. I want some money. Can you give me some money? My perspective, from my viewpoint, is that of a youth being engaged and consumed by the outdoors, the trees become an escape, possibly in a tree house or in climbing, as stated here. But as we get older, we're consumed by material possessions that we feel are just adequate to bring happiness. And that no longer is it the engagement or the feeling or the touching of the trees or the escape to the upward part of it that become needed. So I feel as though the asking of things are just never enough. And once again, the material possessions and the process of buying in something shiny and new that is of instant gratification. So I came up with these in my own words that I would find in the Giving Tree. So once upon a time, there was a mom, her children, trees, and together they were priceless. Okay, so it seems like the images aren't appearing. Down
Here, I can, here, I'll pause the recording.
Okay, so before I proceed with my part of the presentation, and once again, from an educational perspective of cost, my research really is focused around sustainability and about site specificity. So my research title is A Feminist Teaching Artist Residency at Home that is informed by a Living in the Ethics of Care curriculum, which, to break that down, is feminist pedagogical practices that are encompassed in an artist residency, which is often exclusive in nature, but then even more exclusive with motherhood and children. That is going to be informed by a living curriculum, which is a theoretical frame of curriculum, but then also the theory of ethics of care, which was introduced in the 1970s by a famous theorist who I got to meet, Dr. Nell Noddings. So in the images above, my son is on the left and he's 7. His name is Andrew. My 2 children embracing nature in the center there. And then my daughter on the right-hand side, Cora. So we will be creating an artist residency collaboratively, participatory together at our land here in central New Jersey. And we will be encompassing outdoor living of inclusiveness of the seasons of August to October. And the curriculum is going to be driven by my children's passions and lived experiences and interests. And a lot of this will be really looking at relationships and connections that are the main ideas that will be discussed. So this is kind of where it all began. And I feel that my son really has, I know children, when you become a mom or a parent, that really can change and alter your life. But my children not only did that for me as a human, but also as an artist as well, which I'll kind of close with of the evolution of my work. But here's where it all began. And my son had approached me after homeschooling him for numerous years prior to this pandemic. And he had pretty much stated to me that he longed for a different way of learning. And that learning was to take himself out of the walls of our home and engage more with nature. And this is an image that I had taken and documented of him literally self-influencing himself, going about learning in a different capacity. Sorry about that. And what he did was he went around to each tree on our property and he gathered leaves, placed them onto the blacktop, and then created a math assignment for himself. Then he took it one step further and identified how all the leaves are different in shape, color, pattern. And then he took those leaves and placed them with the trees that he had gotten them from or in that vicinity. And we furthered the curriculum with learning about the trees on our property. So this is really where my art shifted and my homeschooling shifted. And not only that, but just our curriculum as a whole. And then in seeing his passion and his guidance, he really got into the moais, which are located in Easter Island, Rapa Nui, a Polynesian island in the Pacific coast. And they are intended to protect the land of the natives. So they overlook the ocean. So in knowing that, I had then gotten this excavation archaeology kit, and my son really went to town on this and saw that he could make things appear. And this was just complete confidence for him. And he really got attached to history and the history of art. So in doing that, next slide, please. This is kind of the primer of our residency. So this is a tree that had fallen down during a storm on our property. And instead of taking it and having the tree company remove it, and we probably think that it's repurposed for paper or some other mulch or whatever it is, we decided to keep these. And in knowing my son's passion of Easter Island and Rapa Nui and the moais, we are going to create these pieces to be figures of our moais, of our family, of a family of 4, looking out at our street, protecting our land. So in this, I had put the word identity because I feel that these stick figures, which the giving tree of the gift of figures as our title here, really allow my children's imagination and identity to shine through. So our learning has gone from buying materials for homeschooling to then repurposing in a sustainable approach, which is making our curriculum encompassed of our land. So in this image here, once again, these are sticks that had fallen onto the ground, which we had not, taken off of the trees by any means, but we collectively put them together to create some kind of movement within, the human figurative form. But then we also went garbage picking, which on the right-hand side is a close-up of taking pieces of the garbage out to use them for connections to build these structures. So our studio becomes nature in our residency of learning. So once again, from an educational perspective, the sticks are giving to us something of a gift, right? And we need to utilize that gift. So my children here, you can see that these images are really coming to life, right? You can see the innocence and them creating their own kind of world encompassed of nature. And that right there in itself is priceless. This is lifelong learning that is going to be there for the rest of their lives, that they're going to remember. And also, what are they getting out of this, right? Like position, space, there's mathematics involved in this. There's so much from an educational perspective that is priceless, and that cost is here on our property, right? Like I said in the beginning, like our curriculum has shifted from material possession to the possession of nature. And this is just a further close-up of this kind of community that my children have created with the sticks here. So the evolution of my work, I have a background in photography, which can be quite expensive, whether it be from the cameras to the chemicals and so on, and also the lugging around of your equipment, the view camera, which is quite heavy, to now being at home, being a stay-at-home mother, which I'm proud to say. I know some people, it's a controversial term, but I do embrace that term. And I am a researcher, scholar, but I'm also a teacher at home. And most importantly, the mom. So being at home and knowing that I'm kind of isolated here, not at University Park anymore, how can my work still exist in the space that I'm in, but have agency within myself and what I stand for and identify as an artist, which I am a feminist artist. So I created this kind of installation piece, which this is not how it would be exhibited. It would be on an ironing board with an iron going to show the domesticity of this, because these are sewn onto a very delicate pink bed sheet. But this is a year's worth of lint that was gathered, collected, and formed as Pussies Everywhere, that was influenced by the Beatles, Here, There, and Everywhere, to show the visibility of a reproductive organ, which is often overlooked in education as a whole. But having my children be involved in this as well, to allow them to know that seeing an image like this should be something of the norm. It should not be something that's shunned. So my work has really evolved from the cost of just the material that we have here, but still from the educational perspective. So my inspiration and a lot of conversation with my children too have been around this wonderful Hungarian feminist eco artist, Agnes Dennis, who's recognized as the pioneer land art movement participant, as well as an innovator in ecological thinking within contemporary art. So Dennis reimagines humankind's relationships to Earth by outlining models of symbolic, responsible, and sustainable living for future generations. And this piece in the background here is a pyramid that she created where people could come and plant, plants or herbs or whatever they may be, and they could come and take from it too. So it was a community pyramid of herbs and plants. So on the left here is the title of it is called Tree Mountain, a living time capsule, and it's located in Finland. It is encompassing of 11,000 trees, which were planted by 11,000 people. And it will take about 400 years or so for it to come to the full growth of what Dennis had projected and made as a concept. This project was commissioned by the city government and the United Nations in Finland. And it's a forest made by humanity. So her concept and what she always thought was to bring an ecosystem into an area that doesn't have it. And it will take 4 centuries for this ecosystem to establish itself, even with it being man-made, human-made. So each volunteer, like I had said before, planted the tree and received a certificate that can then be passed down to their families. So it's something that's not just about the ecosystem, but also for families to come and see how we need to not deforest any situation, but rather forest a situation. So there was no funding after it was built from the government. So it's unfortunate, but a lot of the trees have come down. Dennis is no longer with us, but she does have people that, go and visit to make sure everything's okay. But yeah, since there is no funding of it, it's kind of parts of it are being destroyed a little bit. And on the right-hand side is a model, but it was established, a Forest for New York City, a peace park for mind and soul in 2014. And Dennis's vision was to create a landfill in Queens, New York, and turn it into a forest for New Yorkers. And this will at least take a couple of centuries, like the image on the left in Finland, to grow to completion. But the aims is to establish a forest of 100,000 trees on 117 acres of barren land outside of, like I said, New York. So in the center here is her own words. And she says that we live in nature, we are nature. So bringing that kind of cityscape and city environment and having this kind of access to an ecosystem besides Central Park, which is man-made as well. But Dennis writes, and I think it's important to use her words, that the importance of this project on the right-hand side here is not only to help with health conditions, but to transform a treeless barren landfill into thriving forests. More than merely cleaning the air and groundwater, a place of beauty will be created that people will be able to visit and take pleasure in, a destination to give them strength for the challenges of modern life.
All right, thank you, Zena. And now to my portion of the show, I'm going to talk a little bit about how visual arts and sustainability, like what that can look like for you, if that is something that you're interested in. And I think the great thing is that because visual arts does require so much material, that it's also something that can be applied to your personal life as well. So I got interested in this quote from the Giving Tree that says, "You may cut off my branches and build a house, then you will be happy," which kind of conforms to this idea that, the tree is, willing to give her branches one of the most distinctive and probably bountiful parts of herself as a tree, so that this boy can meet some kind of hetero-patriarchal capitalist goal, right, of owning a house that his family can live in. And this really kind of brought out to me the issues that get connected when you are taking something from the land. So like, how can you be more responsible and reciprocal in the way that you engage with nature, as well as, the things that you use in your day-to-day life, like what would that look like? So when we think about, what is sustainability? Sustainability is a really big term, which generally means being able to do something over and over again forever, right? And that resources won't run out, and that it would be able to continue onwards, infinitely. But I think when it comes to thinking about sustainability in our personal lives, and our actions and our communities, it can get a little bit muddled. I think one of the first things that people get told is that sustainability is no plastic straws, right? Which is, one part of a very, very large conversation, as well as, calculate your carbon footprint. How much energy are you using, right? Are you eating organic, sustainable, free-range, cruelty-free, fruits and vegetables and animals? Are you vegan? How much energy are you using? Are you turning off your lights when you leave a room? Do you need to drive so far to go a certain place? What about the things you're buying? Are the things you're buying made sustainably and ethically? Usually those things are very, very expensive, which personally to me doesn't feel very sustainable. I don't know. Also, these marketed phrases to us about like reduce, reuse, recycle, which are very important, but what does that mean for the systems that we live in, right? Some people don't have access to recycling, and some people have, less access to things that are reusable, right? If you live in a rural area where there's just less things. Same, what is sustainability? Does it mean can you create a sustainable community? Like, what would that look like? Is it going to be something you build physically, or is it going to be more relational, right? And that brings us to sustainability in relationships. Are there certain people and relationships and friendships that you can create that help you feel sustained? And political institutions, are certain political institutions even sustainable in terms of the climate crisis and what people need? And the economics, what are certain economic systems that might be sustainable or unsustainable? And how are you taking care of yourself? So sustainability goes from being this small thing that sounds, sustainability sounds nice, to being very complicated. And then you're like, well, how am I going to take care and do all of these things? Because it can feel very overwhelming. And so I was overwhelmed for some time because I wanted to make art that examined my relationship to nature or the landscape. I was having a really hard time figuring out what materials to use or how to approach it. And the more that I looked into it, the more I realized a couple of things. But something that helped me along this journey was this graph or this illustration. It's called Sites of Shaping and Change. It's a social ecological illustration by the authors of Making and Being. And it kind of describes change happening in a variety of different levels. So first is historical forces. What are major events that are in the process of shaping the future, like the climate crisis? Institutions and rules. What are regulations of places and organizations you're a part of? If I'm an artist and I want to make art and I want to make a sculpture that biodegrades, or has live plants in it, maybe a museum would be a really hard place to show that because it's so climate controlled. Community and media, what media you're exposed to, and groups that you identify with. So what are the conversations you're having, and what conversations are you privy to when we're kind of in a bit of a, the algorithm sound vacuum where we kind of only listen to things that are based off of people who have similar views from us, right? And also intimate network, who are people you see regularly. This doesn't just have to be friends and family. It could be a variety of other people that are in your proximity. And then you, right, is at the most intimate level is you, with your personal beliefs, emotions, and morals that influence your behavior. And then around all of these things, you have more abstract and energetic influences like spirit, earth, soul, mystery, right? Magic. There's going to be all these things that we can't define that run through all these different levels. But something that really stood out to me is that change takes longer to be seen as it moves through each layer, right? So you can make a choice today to change something about the way that you're moving through the world, which is great, but that might take time to trickle through all of those layers and grow. If you decide today that you are going to commit yourself to a, more sustainable way of living that incorporates decolonial thought and anti-capitalist thinking, it may take a very, very long time for those things to manifest themselves. So what can you do personally? And so I like thinking about sustainability in terms of what does this look like for me? Because that, I think, helps structure how you can start change today. And I feel like that feels much more actionable than thinking about how can I do something that is also going to change things that are much farther in the future. Because there's things that you can do personally that help support that change through the layers, but it might take longer. So how can you sustainably make change in your own life for the things that you care about and the communities you care about? So something that was also helpful as I was thinking about designing my projects and thinking about these layers was examining the phases and life cycle of a project. This is also for Making and Being, and I've shortened the list a bit, but these are all different steps that are a part of making a project. So support, how are your needs being met? Source, where are your materials from? Are you needing to buy, do you make paintings with acrylic paint? Are you going to need to switch to another material if that's what you're thinking about? Labor, what roles do you take on? Are you just making something and giving it, or are you a part of a transactional relationship, or are you a community liaison? Are you also an educator? There's a variety of different roles we take on as we make tools. What devices do you use? Are you thinking about shifting your sustainable practice from, doing paintings to doing things with natural dyeing with plants? Then you might need to buy a bunch of new materials. So that might change the way that you consider your project. Narrate, how is your project represented? How are you going to talk about it? Where is it going to be located? I like encounter, which is the context of the presentation. Are you going to be sharing your project on a wall in a gallery? Is it going to be in a community? Is it going to be on a lawn? Which is something I'll talk about a little bit later. Acquire, how is the project going to be stored? If it's a painting, you can kind of tuck it into, a quarter of a room, but what about a biodegradable piece of artwork that might have living objects in it? and departure. How are you going to dispose of the project when it's over? As artists, we like to think that our artwork's going to live forever in a museum, but chances are a lot of things are going to have to be thrown away or disposed of. So how are you going to take that into consideration? And I know that these are a lot of points, but I do want to say that any one of these points could be a singular place of entry into examining sustainability in your practice. You don't have to do all of them at once. We know sustainability is complicated, and we know making projects is complicated. So how can you sustainably move your practice or your life towards sustainability? And what does that personally look like for you? So these are questions I have asked myself. And so to show you some of the work I've done, this is a project called What Binds Us, which was a public sculpture project during the beginning of the pandemic. I did this with what's considered yard waste, which were essentially very beautiful sticks that were put by the side of the road that were meant to be picked up by public works, right, to be created into mulch or something like that, or compost. And they were just so beautiful, and there were so many of them because it was springtime. So I reached out to my neighbors through the Nextdoor app and website, and it was really lovely because people were really interested in this, and they wanted to find a way to connect with other people. And so I made these sculptures without even telling them what they were going to look like, because it really depended upon what was in their yard, right? Which I think they enjoyed the mystery of that. But I had to work with the specific elements, physical elements of whatever was there, and made these temporary structures. They lasted for about 2 weeks to a month or two, depending on the person and what they consented to in their lawn. And I liked thinking about this, the fact that I was kind of acting as, challenging the space of public and private space, right, of the lawn, while also connecting people on their quarantine walks, and also creating a sense of, structures of almost hope somewhat, because these were all kind of in roughly the similar neighborhood, so people saw structures pop up in maybe their neighbors' lawns that they didn't even know. So that's something that I really enjoyed. And as well, another project that I worked on, which I will call Disturbed Earth, this is a site-specific drawing and ephemeral intervention. So there's this place near State College called Fisherman's Paradise, and it's it is a parcel of land and a part of a river that the state is really trying to redevelop and conserve the trout populations in the river. So there's all of these rules and regulations. You can't take certain things in the park. You can't take certain things, which is very interesting relationship to have with the land, with all of these rules and regulations on how you can interact with it. And I found it so strange that in this place that was so focused on conservation, that they were also actively developing certain parts of it for other use. So as I was on a long hike, I noticed that there was this whole part of the land that had been cleared and bulldozed, and it was really disturbing to me. There was no signage that explained what was going on, and there are other parts of the park that are developed for, I think there's a gun range for a local police or military training, and so things like that are around, but I hadn't seen anything in the process of being made. So while I was there, I saw all of this land that had been kind of torn up, and I made this site-specific drawing with the clay that was there and some charcoal that I had, and I used the branches to help guide the lines and structures that were on it. And because I was drawing on the ground, I was also picking up all of the different textures of the dirt and rocks that had been pulled up and pulverized in this way. And let's see, I thought I had another photo. Maybe it's later in the slide on accident, but essentially I was really trying to think about the memory of the earth. There are all these little deer footprints that are in the clay, and I was just thinking about the history that was on this land, and just wanted to take a minute to not necessarily preserve it, because I can't preserve it, but kind of grieving its state of change and meeting it where it was. And I also did this performance, which was indoors, and I was really thinking about place and time and identity. So this is a performance that I did with a video projection of trees changing during the seasons, so just various clips that I had personally taken, some clay, charcoal, sticks, and canvas. And I essentially, during this performance, was trying to place myself within a sense of time. At first I was trying to draw the tree branches, but they were moving and shifting constantly. So I was trying to use the charcoal to chase them, and I couldn't quite chase them. And I was trying to use the clay to kind of, physically put myself into the earth almost, and exploring that. And as well, I drew on myself and got the clay on myself, as well as all over the canvas to try to make myself a part of the drawing, which was trying to be a part of the landscape. So really questioning like my identity as like a natural element in between these natural elements that don't quite make sense, thinking about our relationship to nature in this way. And that's the photo that I had been meaning to share earlier of the branches as they kind of cut across. If you could see like these big marks or these kind of ghost areas are all where those sticks were. And I wanted to close off talking about a anthropologist who's really informed some of my work. So her name is Dr. Natasha Myers. She has talked about reframing the Anthropocene instead as cultivating a Planthropocene. If we think about our state, right, in geological time, centering it all around how we are ruining everything in the Anthropocene is, not necessarily hopeful, right? It kind of assumes that, this human centered period of change is caused by us and will end because of us in some way, which can be, and our words matter, right? And the way that we describe things matters. So she talked about trying to cultivate a Planthropocene. And so I really loved the way that she discussed this. And she identifies the Planthropocene as an aspirational episteme or scene in which we seed solidarities with the plants. It's actually that we are in a deep relationship with another being. There is a profound exchange, a metamorphism between the bodies, and it's actually the plant imposing itself on the human. So rethinking the way that we connect with plants and our relationship with them really connects a lot with the idea of the giving tree, because this is meant to be a reciprocal relationship. It's not meant to be one way. The way that the giving tree is originally written is very anthropocentric, right? There's a human coming and taking and taking and taking, and then nothing is left. But instead, what would that story look like if it was centered around a planthropocentric worldview? What would a reciprocal, a consensual relationship be or look like? And then finally, forming solidarities with plants is one way to nourish and transform human relationships. There are many ways to stage relations to plants, but it is only a Planthropocene if it supports racial justice and decolonial futures. Revolutions can take root in gardens, which I really loved as a way to think about connecting with plants and caring for the land also means caring for other people. And it also transcends all of these historical, institutional, layers of that social ecological change model, which I really enjoyed. And so that wraps up all of my contributions. So I would say that we would take questions, but I believe our one other participant did leave. So, let's see, Zena, do you have any questions for me? I can have questions for you.
I don't think I have any for you. I think it was very thorough and a lot of good thinking, right, to move forward in practice. And that making and being, I think, is a fantastic model to take from. And I will definitely be including that into my library. But yeah, no, I think it was really thorough in how we have to think about the making and the being within nature and our art.
Yeah, it's a very complicated relationship, and I think sometimes it can be stressful or overwhelming when it all gets distilled into one thing, right? Because it kind of makes it sound like all of the change has to happen right at one time.
Yeah.
But that's the thing is that that's not how that's not how change happens. Usually takes place over the course of time and involves a variety of relationships and events. So yeah, Making a Being is like a very beautiful book, and it also has a lot of information about like embodied making. So how to make sure you're making things that are connected with your values and goals and aspirations, but also in a very like physical and somatic way, which is really lovely. But we only have so much time, and I had to talk about some of my own work, not just Making a Being a book report, but really lovely. And yeah, I was wondering about your pussy, sewing sculptures. Are you planning on making more of those? Is that going to be like where do you imagine it being seen? Like because it's happened during the pandemic, I just wonder about that project if it's going to continue.
Yeah, absolutely. So my work I usually do in series. I never just create one piece.
Mhm.
So I really have gotten into feminist mapping during COVID in in watercolors, but this domestic kind of role that I think that lint takes on, especially within my research, is going to be seen again. So what I envision is of a series of different pieces involving this lint, um, possibly taking form of breasts or something to that regard. But lint as a material, you could have 5 huge bags of it and it narrows down. It's like wool, right? It's like, it really becomes dense. So it's been a pleasure to really explore the material of lint. And I have been introduced to lint portraiture, which is amazing. But the process of taking lint in separating in color and everything is very time consuming. But yes, I absolutely envision a series, exhibited of maybe just the creation of maybe this realization of my role within art in this domestic space. Um, yeah, as a woman and making with her children.
Hmm. Yeah, that really got me thinking. I don't know if you have heard of this, but they have attachments for washers that essentially uh, filter out microplastics before they get washed out. Because almost all of our clothes, right, if it's not made with cotton or wool or linen or yeah, any natural plant fiber, if it's made of something like polyester or nylon, a lot of microplastics get shed through our clothes that way. Even if we're like buying secondhand clothing, right, there's still all these plastics, and so yeah, yeah, I just didn't know if you had heard about that because that might be an interesting element to add as well, if you're thinking about like an eco-feminist perspective, because I bet the lint has plastic in it too. Um, I'd be
It
curious.
does. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Thank you.
yeah. I forget what it's called. I saw it on from a I saw it on a website. I'll send it to you later. But yeah, I believe it collects like those plastic fibers. So that might be an interesting element if you wanted to incorporate it.
And I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So in the work that you showed us, there was this community engagement, right,
Mhm.
within your community, but then also the independent exploration in fisherman's
Paradise.
paradise. It should actually be reframed as like an artist paradise, right? Because there's a lot that you could do there.
Yeah.
Um, but so having those two, right, like I was talking about before of my art shifting, and especially during this COVID pandemic, do you think that you'll engage more within the community in a sustainable way, or do you see yourself as an artist practicing and graduating next year, moving on to more of an independent role?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a balance of both. I really enjoyed working with the community, but there is a variety of planning steps involved with planning any kind of community work that I was prepared for, but also not prepared for, especially because these happened outside. During the spring in Pennsylvania, which is very temperamental and will go off and on from being cold, very cold to kind of warm, deceivingly warm, and then just rainy. So juggling other people's schedules, the schedule of the weather, and my own was like it was a lot going on. It took a lot of energy and time, and I think that I know a little bit more about how to like set like a quantity limit because I had like 30 people want these sculptures in, and it was very physically taxing to like be out there making stuff for 8 hours and have to drive home to go like refresh and then come back because I couldn't go into anybody's houses, right, because it's COVID. So yeah, I would love to. I think I realize the complications, and not necessarily complications, but things you really need to think about if you're engaging with the community. And like, I wish I had had a better plan for how to connect them with each other, or how to, create more of like, not like a repository, but almost like a more flexible like contact list. So like if they wanted to somehow stay updated about the state of the project. So yeah, it just required a lot of administrative duties that I don't know if I have the time for. I think with my last year coming up, but I think once I leave, I would love to do this, and I think if I ever got like a grant or something and definitely had extra money to like pay someone to help me with that, that would be lovely. Because I feel like when you're in grad school, you do all the jobs yourself. So I would love to do that, I think. And I think that would help make some of the projects richer and also more reciprocal too, because I'd like to give more to the people in terms of like content or education or resources that I just didn't have the space to, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. It was a rough time, but yeah, that was a long answer to just say yes. Yes, I will.
I can also see possibly like the evolvement of the community once COVID hopefully is under control. That there could be times in the community where certain people come and have it be this participatory type of collaborative project. That would be incredible as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's something really beautiful about making work that other people think that they could make. I think there's this idea that art has to be this very technical, masterful manipulation of elements that nobody else could ever possibly conceive of, which I think fits into a very like Western-centric, linear state of progression and progress, right? There must always be a new genius turn of events that pushes us forward as, human consciousness, but when you make something that anybody else could make, it makes it more accessible, and I feel like it makes people think, wow, like how could I do this? This doesn't look too hard, but I would love to make smaller versions of this with my kids, or which is interesting, is it's something that you did with your own children, in like another way. So I love the accessibility of making something that's more, for everybody, right?
Yeah, I think that as artists and also as our educators, that we really need to dismantle that whole approach of like this intimidation of making art, like entering into a classroom and hearing, I've heard it for all the years of my teaching of, oh, I can't draw, I can't do art. Oh my, I'm not an artist, And I think that like a project like this, or, creating art with sticks and material of the earth, I think can really transform that thought of this boundary and, I can't do to I can do. And like our title suggests, these are gifts from our earth. And I think that we really need to utilize that gift and carry on and forward progress with this, as with the artist that we had mentioned, in bringing an anthropologist and an artist, an ecofeminist artist into this.
Yeah, the future is going to be interdisciplinary and decentralized, right? And based in, reciprocal relationships with each other and with the land. Um, yeah, you're so right. Let's see, did we want to move on to thinking about any of our wrap-up discussion questions, or what are you thinking about?
I mean, I think that we can pose them, right? I mean, we have 10 minutes left, and for those that will be watching this that want to kind of see how we would wrap this up, uh, yeah, so if we, even with not having anybody here, this generative dialogue that's just amongst you and I, but hearing from them too and their thoughts, I'm available for email, and I'm sure you are as well, if there are any questions, which we can leave down. Would the chat still show in
I don't think the chat gets recorded. But yeah, and as well, like even if they don't reach out to us, I think just
yes.
if they have watched this whole thing, they probably have questions they're asking themselves, right? And so maybe some of these questions could be like just personal reflections as well that we could end on. Yeah.
Okay, so let's go to the prompts here.
hmm Yeah, so this first prompt, we're taking it back to my favorite illustration, but thinking about, like, I wonder when you saw this, how you made sense of this, or how you would identify certain forces, institutions and rules, community and media, intimate network, or self behaviors, how you view different elements within each of those levels as well. Like, I wonder, for your own self-reflection, if you think that there's other ways that this graph could go, or how you could view these connections between the layers, and what that might look like for you personally, because this is one representation, but it could be like an infinitely personal presentation, depending on how you wanted to connect things. This could be a tree, it could look like a bike, it could be anything. So I wonder if you wanted to take time to think about this in relation to yourself, like what that would look like. Let's see.
So these were prompts that we had created together. The image here on the left, we do want to give proper introduction of that. So Olga Zimka is an artist who creates figures, and this one is entitled Figurative Willow Branch. And this was done out in nature, which I think that's also something to be said about site specificity. I think there's really this nice entanglement with nature on that. So in these prompts, the first one is, what narratives influence your relationships with nature? And that should ring a bell, because that was at the forefront of our presentation, of asking you to kind of meditate on that and think about that. So that's something that's really powerful, like to think about the relationships that we have with nature, and what are those influences that create that. So that's the first one.
hmm And the second one is, what connection do you have to the Giving Tree? When you read that, if you have read that book, what are your memories tied with it? Do you remember any feelings you had when you read it? Do you have any connection to a personal giving tree? Is there a story you have with a tree in your own life that you can reflect on and think about?
And the third question, have you ever engaged in a reciprocal relationship with your environment? I think pausing and thinking about our relationships with nature is quite often omitted from daily life, but to really sit here and think about that. What have we done, and what are these give and take, right, relationships that we have with our planet Earth? I think in our presentations, the relationships that Alex and I had shown with taking, pieces of branches and sticks that were collected and creating a new form, right? Like, that's a relationship that we're building. But have you ever engaged in that relationship? So that's a good question to think about.
Yeah, I also really like thinking about that too in like in a way if you live somewhere that has less available nature, right? Where if you don't have a yard or a park, which is very common for a lot of people, where can you find nature in between the cracks of the sidewalks or trees in certain places? If you walk by them, like every day to work, like how can you create those relationships with those plants as well? I just thought about that as you were talking. And then number four, what have plants given you? So when I think about it, I ate food today that had sweet potatoes in it. So they gave me energy for this talk. But thinking about, the food that we eat as being something that is given to us by plants, or everything from that to shading our house in the summer and keeping it a little cooler. So, yeah, what have plants given you? That can be a really big question that just sitting and figuring that out or exploring that can be really powerful.
Mhm. And I'm gonna answer that question for you.
Yeah.
I think that question in itself, I think out of these five for me really hit home. So what have plants given to me? I grew up with plants my whole entire life. My grandmother's from Spain. Her name is Delfina, which means flower, which I named my daughter middle name after. But anyway, so I've been in, really a part of my life is plants and flowers and trees and nature. But plants to me have given me my allergies to be gone. So you talk about being in a home. I have spent a lot of money on air filtration systems in my house, air purifiers that go into rooms and so on. And my doctor, who's a holistic doctor, had approached me and said, well, why don't you just get a whole bunch of plants and see if that clears the air? And since I've had them in my house for about a year and a half, and I'm talking like 10 to 15 plants per room, I don't have any allergy issues anymore. So that is a plus. So if you're watching this and you suffer from, seasonal allergies, that might be something that you want to consider because
Yeah.
yeah, there you go. So all of my plants are on the other side of this, but I'm not going to turn. The last question here is, what have you learned from nature? And I think posing that question within the educational standpoint from the beginning, I have learned that curriculum really can be 100% outdoors. So for me, what I've learned from nature and from my children is that there's so much more learning happening in nature than there is inside the walls of an institution.
Yeah, that is really powerful. I've noticed that just in my introduction to drawing students, the confidence they have when they're drawing something that's organic compared to the confidence they have when they're trying to draw a cube,
Mhm.
light years different. There's something really giving and forgiving about nature that I think just generally can make you feel just a little bit more at home, depending on what it is and your story with it.
Mhm.
All right.
Okay, so we're going to end our presentation right here on time with advice from a tree. And the first one is to stand tall and proud. The second is to go out on a limb, remember your roots, drink plenty of water, be content with your natural beauty, and lastly, enjoy the view.
All right. Oh, wow. Well, thank you so much, Zena, for this wonderful collaborative talk. I really enjoyed our time together. And thank you to anybody who is watching the recorded version of this. If we could give you a prize, I would give it to you, but this is virtual, so.
Alex, thank you so much for partnering up with me and creating this collaborative piece of the Giving Tree, which I think takes us back to our youth, right? And I think that's really where we need to be, is when we were not so kind of convoluted and overshadowed by all these, societal barons that are put up upon us. But it's been a pleasure. So thank you.
Yes, amazing. Well, thank you, everybody. I will stop the recording.